The stone city of Machu Picchu is one of the most fascinating archaeological sites on the planet.
There's a place on Earth where the mountains hold secrets that modern science is only beginning to understand. High in the Peruvian Andes, where the air thins and the clouds wrap around ancient peaks like a shroud, something extraordinary was built. Not extraordinary in the way we casually throw that word around today, but extraordinary in a way that stops engineers mid-sentence, makes geologists pause their calculations, and leaves archaeologists staring at their data in silence. These are structures that should not exist, not because they are supernatural, but because every honest analysis of them reveals a gap, a chasm, between what we believe ancient humans were capable of and what is literally, physically, undeniably standing before us. Peru's megalithic ruins are not just impressive. They are a direct challenge to our entire understanding of human history. And the closer science looks, the more uncomfortable that challenge becomes. Let us begin with what we can see and measure, because the facts alone are staggering enough before we even begin to theorize. At Sacsayhuaman, a fortress complex sitting above the old Inca capital of Cusco, there are stone blocks that weigh between 100 and 200 tons. Some estimates push even higher. These are not rough boulders dropped into place. They are carefully shaped, interlocked, and fitted against one another with a geometric complexity that modern architects find genuinely difficult to explain. Each block connects to its neighbors across multiple faces, sometimes 12 or more contact surfaces per stone, with zero mortar between them. No binding agent, no filler, just stone against stone, held in place by weight, geometry, and a craftsmanship that defies the tools supposedly available at the time. The material itself makes this even harder to rationalize. Many of these blocks are made of andesite and diorite, two of the hardest natural stones on the planet. Diorite ranks between 6.5 and 7th on the Mohs hardness scale, placing it just below quartz. The tools we have evidence of in ancient Peru, bronze chisels and copper implements, rank at roughly 3.5. Attempting to carve diorite with bronze is not merely inefficient. Physically, it should leave the metal worn to nothing long before the stone shows meaningful shaping. And yet the shaping is there, smooth, curved, angular, and precise. At Ollantaytambo, a temple complex sitting at nearly 9,200 feet above sea level, enormous stone monoliths were transported from a quarry located on the far side of a river gorge and up a steep mountainside. Researchers who have physically walked the route confirm there is no logical path by which these stones could have been dragged, rolled, or slid using ropes, sleds, and human labor alone. The terrain simply does not cooperate. Modern civil engineers have run the numbers on similar projects and concluded that even with contemporary cranes and equipment, replicating this transport would be a serious logistical undertaking. Then there's Machu Picchu, which people know mostly through photographs, but rarely understand through engineering. Built on a narrow mountain ridge in one of the most seismically active regions on Earth, it incorporates a drainage and water management system of such sophistication that it has functioned continuously for centuries. The stone foundations have survived earthquakes that demolished Spanish colonial buildings, constructed 400 years later using European techniques. The difference is not random. The ancient walls were built to flex, with their polygonal interlocking shapes redistributing seismic energy rather than resisting it rigidly. That is not a happy accident. That is deliberate seismic engineering. Here is where mainstream explanations begin to quietly fall apart. The conventional story goes something like this. The Inca were incredibly resourceful, used massive coordinated labor forces, employed ramps and ropes and wooden sledges, and through sheer determination achieved these results. It sounds plausible until you sit with the specifics. The surface textures on many of these stones do not match what bronze or stone percussion tools would produce. Under close examination and modern microscopic analysis, certain cut surfaces display a smoothness and uniformity consistent with high-speed rotary machining, not hand chiseling. Some joints are so perfectly flat they appear milled. In 2022, a peer-reviewed study examining surface grooves at multiple Peruvian archaeological sites concluded that the marks present could not have been produced through conventional hand tool methods alone. The researchers called for further investigation into, and this is a direct reference to their language, Unknown methods of stone shaping. That phrase, unknown methods, carries enormous weight. This was not a fringe publication. These were geoscientists applying standard analytical methods to physical evidence and arriving at a conclusion that the accepted historical narrative cannot accommodate. The stone of 12 angles in Cusco is a frequently cited example, and for good reason. This single block fits seamlessly between 12 other individually shaped stones, each contact surface cut to match its neighbor perfectly. The complexity of producing such a piece with hand tools is not just challenging. Mathematically, the margin for error required to achieve those fits would demand either extraordinary luck repeated dozens of times across thousands of stones, or a level of precision planning and execution that implies tools and knowledge we have not yet identified. Some researchers have pointed to evidence that certain stones may have been chemically or thermally treated before shaping. In 2023, spectroscopic analysis conducted at the National University of San Marcos on select stones at Sacsayhuaman found mineral surface patterns suggesting the outer layers of specific blocks had been altered, possibly through heat or chemical exposure, in ways that no known Incan process accounts for. No furnaces, no industrial residue, just altered stone, and silence where an explanation should be. The Inca Empire as a political entity rose in the 13th century and reached its peak in the 15th. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1532, they asked the Inca directly about the massive stone walls at Cusco and Sacsayhuaman. The recorded responses from those conversations are remarkably consistent. These walls were here before us. The Inca themselves credited an earlier civilization with the megalithic constructions and built their own, noticeably less precise, stonework on top of and around those older foundations. This is not a minor detail. It is a seismic crack in the conventional timeline, because if the Inca inherited these structures rather than built them, then we need to ask who came before, and how far back we must look. Carbon dating cannot be applied directly to stone, since there is no organic material within rock to measure decay. But organic material found in construction layers at the base of several sites has returned dates pushing 4,000 to 5,000 years before the present, and in some cases potentially further. This does not identify a builder, but does place advanced human activity in the Andes at a depth of time that the standard historical model has been reluctant to engage with seriously. Geological studies of the wider Andean region also point to significant climatic and seismic disruption occurring between approximately 11,000 and 12,000 years ago, during the period known as the Younger Dryas. This era saw dramatic glacial melting, widespread flooding, and rapid environmental transformation across much of the planet. Any civilization existing in the Andes during or before this period would have faced catastrophic conditions. Their organic structures, wood, cloth, records, food stores, would have been destroyed. Only the hardest things would survive. Stone would survive. For centuries, the limits of our tools meant the limits of our understanding. That has changed dramatically in the past 2 decades, and what emerging technology is showing us in Peru is rewriting the conversation. LiDAR technology, which uses laser pulses fired from aircraft to construct precise 3-dimensional terrain maps even through dense vegetation, has transformed Andean archaeology. In 2022, a collaborative LiDAR survey of the Sacred Valley and surrounding highlands revealed buried walls, hidden terraces, and geometric subsurface patterns extending for miles in multiple directions. Some of these features align with surface structures above them. Others have no visible counterpart at all, suggesting entire buried complexes that have never been excavated or even acknowledged in the historical record. Near Moray, a site once interpreted simply as an agricultural terrace system, LiDAR combined with soil and acoustic analysis has opened the possibility that these precisely engineered concentric circular rings served a fundamentally different purpose, possibly related to thermal regulation, solar alignment, or acoustic experimentation. The symmetry and engineering precision of those rings is not consistent with basic farming infrastructure. 3-dimensional laser scanning at Ollantaytambo has produced millimeter-level measurements of stone joints, and the data is striking. Blocks that were assumed to have minor tolerances in their fits are actually connected with a precision consistent with what engineers associate with mechanical fabrication. Thermal analysis further revealed that adjacent blocks expand and contract as a single unified unit during temperature fluctuations, meaning they were shaped with an understanding of material physics that goes beyond what we attribute to any known ancient Andean culture. Artificial intelligence is now being applied to the architectural data across dozens of Peruvian sites simultaneously. Pattern recognition algorithms have identified consistent mathematical ratios embedded in the layouts of multiple unconnected sites, including proportions corresponding to the Golden Ratio and Fibonacci sequences. These are not coincidences scattered randomly. They are repeated, deliberate, and standardized across geography and apparent time, suggesting a unified knowledge system that predates what we recognize as formal Andean civilization. What all of this evidence converges on is not a single dramatic answer, but rather a fundamental revision of the question itself. For a long time, the question has been framed as, how did primitive people build these things? The evidence now suggests that framing is the problem. The people who built these structures were not primitive in any meaningful sense of the word. They possessed a sophisticated understanding of materials, geometry, astronomy, hydrology, and seismic physics. They engineered for centuries into the future. They worked with stone harder than their supposed tools. And then, for reasons that geology, cataclysm, and conquest help partially explain, the specific knowledge they carried disappeared. The University of Oxford published research in 2023 examining the concept of technological amnesia, the documented phenomenon by which advanced skills and techniques can be entirely lost across generations following catastrophe, population collapse, or forced cultural erasure. Peru's megalithic construction methods were used as a primary case study. The conclusion was not speculative. It was grounded in the observable fact that techniques can vanish without leaving explanatory records, and that the physical evidence of those techniques can persist long after the knowledge that produced them is gone. That is precisely what we are looking at in the Andes. The knowledge is gone. The stones remain. When the Spanish arrived and burned Inca records, dismantled oral traditions, and built churches on top of sacred foundations, they did not just conquer a civilization. They severed the last living thread, connecting the present to whatever came before the Inca. What had already been imperfectly understood became permanently inaccessible through direct human memory. We are left, centuries later, with only what the stone itself can tell us. And the stone, under every analytical tool we bring to bear on it, keeps saying the same thing. Something happened here that we do not yet fully understand. Peru's megalithic ruins are not a curiosity. They are not the backdrop for tourist photographs or the subject of fringe television specials. They are a legitimate, evidence-backed challenge to our model of human history. Every credentialed researcher who has looked honestly at the physical data, at the stone hardness, at the tool marks, at the transport logistics, at the seismic engineering, at the astronomical alignments, at the carbon dates from the foundational layers, has encountered the same gap between what the conventional story says and what the physical reality shows. That gap is not closing. With better technology, it is actually widening in certain respects, because the more precisely we can measure these structures, the more precise and deliberate their construction appears, and the harder it becomes to attribute them to what we assume ancient people had access to. This does not require mythology. It does not require explanations that abandon the physical world. It requires something more demanding and more honest. The willingness to look at what is actually in front of us and follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads somewhere the textbooks have not yet gone. The stones of the Andes have been standing for thousands of years, waiting for us to ask better questions. We are finally beginning to, and what the answers are revealing is not a mystery that diminishes humanity. It is a mystery that expands it, a reminder that human capability, human knowledge, and human history run deeper, stranger, and more remarkable than we have been willing to admit. The greatest mystery of Peru was never really about the stones. It was about how long it took us to take them seriously.